Millionaire abandons girlfriend, years later sees her with quadruplets and wants to take her kids away, but what she does leads him to shock. Before the start of the story, comment below, which country are you watching us from right now? Please enjoy the video. Emily was in the bridal room fixing her veil. Her best friend Emily was trying to cheer her up. The wedding should have started already. He loves you, Emily. He's just late because he wants everything to be perfect. But even Emily didn't sound sure. Emily felt something was wrong. John was never late. She kept looking at the clock. Her chest felt tight. Every second felt like forever. Finally, the priest came in. He looked serious, and Emily knew something bad had happened. "I'm sorry, Miss Emily," the priest said softly. "We've just been told John isn't coming." Those words hit Emily like a punch. Her legs felt weak, but she held onto the table. Tears ran down her face, messing up her makeup. "This can't be true. It's a mistake," Emily cried, her voice shaking. Without waiting for an answer, she ran out of the church. People turned to stare as she ran down the aisle. She felt so embarrassed, but her heart hurt even more. She stopped in the parking lot, looking everywhere for John. He wasn't there. She looked up at the sky, trying not to cry, but she couldn't stop the tears. She felt so sad and humiliated. But what did I do wrong? She thought. Then she remembered something John had said 2 weeks ago. She saw it in her mind like it just happened. "Are you sure you want this?" John had asked, holding her hand. "Of course I do," Emily said, confused. "We love each other, don't we?" John hesitated, then gave her a weak smile. Emily hadn't realized it was a warning. Now, sitting on the sidewalk in her white dress, Emily let the tears fall. The embarrassment and pain were too much. She wished she could disappear. Across the street, John was sitting in a car, hiding. He held his phone, hearing his mom's words in his head. "This marriage isn't right for you, John. Think about your future." John looked down, feeling guilty. He knew he had done something terrible, but he didn't have the courage to face Emily or all the people expecting him to marry her. Emily wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She made a choice. She would leave. She wouldn't let anyone see her as weak. The next day, Emily left the city. No goodbyes. No explanations. She just got on a bus to somewhere far away. Every mile hurt, but she knew she had to keep going. Staying wasn't an option. At first, life was hard. Emily found a small room to live in a new town. She worked at a cafe and tried to start over. But the pain and sadness stayed with her. Everything felt broken, until one day, something happened that changed her life forever. 2 months later, Emily started feeling strange. She was sick in the mornings, always tired, and felt like something was different. At first, she thought it was just stress from everything that had happened. But one day, she decided to take a test from the pharmacy. That night, in her small bathroom, Emily stared at the test. It was positive. Her heart raced. She felt scared but also happy. She didn't know how she would raise a baby alone, with no family around to help. But at the same time, she felt like this baby gave her a new reason to keep going. In the days after, Emily started planning. She went to see a doctor to make sure everything was okay. But nothing could have prepared her for what the doctor said during the checkup. The doctor smiled kindly at the screen and said, "Congratulations, Emily. It's 4. Emily blinked, confused. "For quadruplets," the doctor said calmly. The world felt like it was spinning. For babies? It was way more than she expected and way more than she thought she could handle. "Can I do this?" Emily whispered without even realizing she had spoken. The doctor smiled again. Mothers always find a way. With the news of her pregnancy, Emily knew she had to change her life. Her tiny apartment was too small now. She worked hard at the cafe, saving every penny. After some time, She was able to rent a small house at the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough for her and her future babies. Even with 4 babies on the way, Emily didn't slow down. She worked as much as she could and went to all her doctor's appointments. She spent her time fixing up the house and getting ready for the babies. But not every day was easy. Some nights, Emily cried by herself. The weight of everything felt so heavy. She had so many fears and doubts. And she couldn't stop wondering, if John knew, would he even care? Every time that thought came, she pushed it away. She focused only on what she needed to do. The news of the quadruplets was shocking, but it also gave Emily new strength. She knew she had already been through so much and survived. She could handle anything now. Her children would come first, no matter what. And no one, not even John, could change that. The months went by faster than Emily thought. Between going to the hospital and fixing up the house, she didn't have much time to think about everything. Then the big day came. The birth was tough, but all 4 babies were born healthy. When Emily held each baby in her arms, she felt something new, pure love. All her fears disappeared at that moment. She promised herself she would do whatever it took to care for them. 5 years later, Emily had gotten used to life as a single mom with quadruplets. Her once quiet house was now loud, messy, and full of laughter. Each boy had his own personality. Lucas was the curious one, always asking questions. Noah was shy but super loving. Liam was the funny one, always making everyone laugh. And Oliver was the leader, always organizing his brothers for their mischief. Life was tiring, but Emily was happy. She worked hard at several jobs to take care of her boys. Even on the hardest days, she didn't complain. Every smile from her children reminded her why she kept going. But life doesn't always go as planned. One afternoon, Emily took the boys to the park to play. Everything felt normal, until she saw someone she never thought she'd see again. It was John. Emily froze. Her heart started beating fast. John was sitting on a bench, talking to someone. When he saw her, his expression changed. He looked at the 4 boys playing nearby, and his face showed shock. The boys looked just like him. Emily's worst fear had come true. She couldn't move, her eyes stuck on John. The boys ran around, laughing and playing, not knowing what was happening. John stared at the boys, then back at Emily. It was clear he knew the truth. Emily's heart raced. She needed to leave before he could come over. Grabbing her bag, she tried to stay calm. Lucas, Noah, Liam, Oliver, let's go, it's time to head home, she called out loudly, trying to hide her fear. The boys groaned, begging for more time to play. But Emily's firm voice made them follow her. The boys started picking up their toys scattered around the park. Emily kept urging them to hurry. But just as she was about to leave, she heard a voice behind her. Emily. She froze. That voice, it was heavy, familiar, and made her stomach twist. Slowly, she turned around and saw John. His eyes were fixed on her, filled with confusion, surprise, and something she couldn't quite understand. John, she said softly, trying to act calm, but her voice shook. Are they your kids? He asked, pointing at the boys still busy with their toys. Emily felt her face grow warm. She knew this moment would come someday. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. Yes, they're my children. John stepped closer, his eyes moving between Emily and the boys. He seemed to be putting the pieces together in his head. How old are they? He asked, though the answer was clear. 5, Emily replied, trying to keep steady. John's face changed, like he had been hit with something heavy. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped. After a long pause, he finally whispered, Are they mine? Emily felt like the ground had disappeared under her feet. She had thought about this moment for years, but now that it was here, she didn't know what to say. Finally, she decided to be honest. Yes, John. They're yours. The silence that followed felt like it would never end. John ran a hand through his hair, a habit Emily remembered so well. His eyes went back to the boys, who were now watching her, sensing that something was going on. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice full of hurt and anger. Emily crossed her arms, trying to protect herself. "You left me, John. You walked away without a word. I was alone, humiliated, and pregnant. What did you expect me to do?" John blinked, searching for something to say, but stayed quiet. He knew she was right. "I need to meet them," he finally said. Emily stepped back, shaking her head. "It's not that simple, John. They don't know who you are." "Why not?" "I'm their father," he said firmly. Those words hit Emily like a wave, filling her with anger. She stepped closer, looking him straight in the eyes. "Father? You don't know what it means to be a father, John. You weren't there when I stayed up all night worrying about how to pay the bills. You weren't there when I cared for 4 babies all by myself. Don't you dare call yourself their father." John swallowed hard, her words cutting deep. He knew she was right, but he couldn't let the conversation end like this. "I know I made a mistake," he said quietly. "But that doesn't change the fact that they're my children too. I have the right to know them, Emily," John said firmly. Emily let out a bitter laugh. "You gave up that right the day you left me at the altar?" As they argued, Lucas, the most curious of the quadruplets, walked over and tugged on his mother's dress. "Mommy, who is this man?" he asked, his big brown eyes sparkling with curiosity. Emily looked down at her son, her heart sinking. Before she could answer, John knelt down in front of Lucas. His face softened for the first time since he approached. "Hi there, champ. My name is John," he said, offering a hesitant smile. Lucas tilted his head, studying the stranger. "Do you know my mommy?" John chuckled lightly and glanced at Emily before answering. "Yes, I do." Emily took a deep breath and gently nudged Lucas back toward the playground. "Go play with your brothers, sweetheart. Mommy will be there soon." Lucas hesitated but eventually ran off to join his siblings. Emily turned back to John, her expression hard. "You can't just show up and expect everything to be fine. That's not how this works," she said. John shook his head. "I'm not asking to fix everything right now. But I'm not going away, Emily. Not this time." Emily felt panic rising in her chest. She knew John wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. That evening, Emily tucked the boys into bed, her heart heavy. She couldn't stop thinking about John. As much as she wanted to protect her children, she knew it would be impossible to keep him away now that he knew the truth. Across town, John sat in his luxurious apartment, staring out the window. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily and the boys. For the first time in years, he felt a deep regret for the choices he had made. He knew he needed to make things right. A few days later, Emily was busy with the boys when there was a knock at the door. She opened it and froze. John was standing there again, his expression serious and determined. "Emily, we need to talk," he said bluntly. "We have nothing to talk about, John," she replied, crossing her arms. "I'm not leaving until we do." The tension was thick, and Emily knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Before she could close the door, Lucas appeared in the hallway. "Mommy, it's the man from the park," he said, pointing at John. Emily forced a smile for her son, but John seized the moment. "Hi there, champ," he said, kneeling down again. "I'm John." Lucas tilted his head, clearly curious, but Emily quickly stepped in. "Lucas, go back to your room, sweetheart. Mommy will be there soon," she said firmly. Once Lucas was gone, she turned back to John, her irritation clear. "You can't just show up here and talk to them. That's not how this works." John's voice was firm. "Emily, they're my children. I have the right to know them." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "You gave up that right when you left me at the altar. I raised these boys on my own. You have no idea what it's like to lose sleep, to sacrifice everything for them, and now you think you can just show up like nothing happened? John took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew she was right, but he also knew he couldn't just walk away. I know I made a mistake. I'm not trying to justify what I did, but it doesn't change the fact that they're my children too. Emily's heart tightened. She wanted to protect her children from everything, but John wasn't someone who would give up easily. What do you want, John? She asked, exhausted. I want to know them. I want to spend time with them. Is that too much to ask? His eyes were full of genuine intent. It is too much, Emily replied firmly. They don't even know who you are, and I'm not going to let you disrupt their lives. John fell silent for a moment, then said what Emily feared the most. If you don't give me this chance, I'll take it to court. His words hit Emily like a punch. She stood frozen for a second, the weight of the threat sinking in. John left, but the silence after he walked out of the house was deafening. He had made it clear, if she didn't let him be a part of their lives, he would fight for custody. Emily tried to stay calm, but she knew this would be a hard battle. Days later, John had filed a lawsuit for joint custody. The shock hit her like a blow to the chest. He had been absent for 5 years, and now he wanted parental rights? It didn't make sense to her. Desperate, Emily turned to her longtime friend, Amelia, an experienced attorney. They sat at Emily's kitchen table, discussing her options. Emily, we need to be realistic. He has money, resources, and a powerful legal team, Amelia said, going over the documents. But you have something he doesn't, a history of dedication. You've been there for the boys every single day. Emily clutched her coffee cup, her hands shaking. What if that's not enough? It will be, Amelia assured her. We'll fight with everything we've got. The first step is building your defense. We'll gather evidence, testimonies, whatever it takes to show that you're the best person to care for them. Emily nodded, but the weight of the upcoming battle was overwhelming. She knew she had to protect her children at all costs. When the initial hearing arrived, Emily entered the courtroom with Amelia by her side. On the other side, John stood with his lawyer, and to her shock, his fiancée, Stella. A wave of anger surged through Emily as she saw Stella. Stella looked completely at ease, as if this were just another social event. John's lawyer began his argument, saying that John had the resources to give the boys a better life, better education, financial security, and a stable home. As he spoke, Emily's chest tightened. His words were polished and convincing, but Emily knew the truth was far from what they were claiming. When it was Amelia's turn to speak, she did so with confidence. Your Honor, my client has dedicated her life to her children. She raised them alone, facing hardships most people couldn't endure. Mr. John may have money, but Miss Emily has something far more valuable, a deep emotional bond with her children, built over years of love, sacrifice, and dedication. The judge listened carefully to both sides. After the hearing, he decided that further investigation was needed before making a decision. He ordered a social worker to visit both Emily's and John's homes to evaluate the living conditions. After the hearing, John approached Emily in the hallway. He looked tired but determined. I don't want to take the boys away from you, Emily. I just want to be part of their lives, he said calmly. You say that now, but taking this to court was your idea, Emily replied, her anger barely hidden. That's not how someone who wants peace acts. Behind him, Stella appeared, placing a hand on his shoulder. We're just trying to make sure the boys get what they deserve, she said with a cold smile. Emily's blood boiled. What they deserve is stability and love, things I've always given them. I don't need advice from you, Stella. Without waiting for a reply, Emily turned and walked away, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. This battle was far from over. In the days that followed, the tension only grew. Stella's presence became more and more intrusive. First, she started showing up at the boys' school events, always impeccably dressed, smiling at other parents, and trying to make friends with the teachers. Soon, rumors began to spread that Emily was a negligent mother. It was clearly a story Stella was behind. Then things got worse. The rumors reached the media. Articles started appearing, painting John as a devoted father trying to make up for lost time, while Emily was portrayed as an uncooperative mother refusing to share her children. Emily felt the sting of public judgment, but she refused to give up. Amelia, however, noticed something more sinister. During a conversation with Emily, she said, "Stella isn't just trying to help him. She has something to gain from all this. John might not see it, but she's manipulating the situation to make sure you lose the boys," Amelia said. "Do you think she wants more than that?" Emily asked, surprised. "I'm certain," Amelia replied. "If she can push you out, she'll have John completely under her control. This is about power, not love." Emily knew Amelia was right. Stella was dangerous, and underestimating her would be a huge mistake. The social worker's visit was another tense moment. Emily spent hours preparing her home, making sure everything showed how happy and well cared for her children were. During the interview, the boys spoke openly about their routines, the games they played, and how much love they received from their mother. The social worker seemed impressed with Emily's dedication. But Emily knew the social worker would also visit John's home. When the social worker arrived at John's place, everything seemed perfect. Stella had arranged everything to look flawless. The children's room was spotless, filled with expensive toys the boys had never seen before. John tried to appear relaxed, but Stella's controlling behavior and rehearsed answers caught the social worker's attention. The social worker grew suspicious of Stella's actions. When the report came back, no final decision had been made, but Emily felt a small victory. She realized the truth about Stella was beginning to show. Still, the pressure didn't stop. John kept insisting he wanted to be part of the boys' lives, while Stella did everything she could to undermine Emily. The battle wasn't over, and Emily knew it would take all her strength to protect her children. The day of the trial arrived. Emily hadn't slept the night before. She was worried about the boys, their future, and what lay ahead. When she arrived at the courthouse with Amelia by her side, she took a deep breath. The room was packed, and dozens of eyes turned toward her. But Emily stood firm. She couldn't show any weakness now. On the other side of the room, John sat next to Stella and his lawyer. He looked calm, but Emily knew he was nervous too. Stella, on the other hand, exuded confidence. Her posture, her gaze, everything about her seemed to say she had already won. The judge began by reviewing the report submitted by the social worker. Emily listened closely as Amelia presented her defense, highlighting the years of sacrifice and love Emily had given as a single mother. It was a story of dedication and unconditional love, something Stella could never understand. Emily knew deep down that her bond with her children was the truth, but when John's lawyer started speaking, the tone shifted completely. He argued that John had the money and resources to give the boys a better life, a life filled with stability, comfort, and opportunities, things he claimed Emily couldn't offer at the same level. As Emily listened, a lump formed in her throat. She knew John's argument was strong, but she also knew the emotional bond she shared with her children was something money could never buy. When it was John's turn to be questioned, Amelia adjusted her blazer and began with a direct question. "Mr. John, could you tell us why you chose to walk away from Emily 5 years ago?" John hesitated, and the silence in the room grew heavy. Finally he spoke. My mother convinced me it wasn't the right time. She said the marriage would be a mistake and I needed to focus on my career." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Emily's face flushed with anger. John's words confirmed what she had feared. He hadn't made the decision alone. Amelia wasted no time pressing further. So you left Emily at the altar because your mother influenced you, is that correct? John took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, but the final decision was mine. I listened to what she said. Amelia stared at him. And Stella? Did she have any involvement in that decision? John blinked, caught off guard. He looked at Stella, who was maintaining a neutral expression, though Emily noticed a flicker of unease in her eyes. He shook his head. Oh, Stella had nothing to do with it. Amelia stepped back, but Emily felt there was more to uncover. The mention of Stella had caused a shift in the atmosphere, and there was something no one seemed ready to address. When Emily took the witness stand, the atmosphere shifted again. She spoke about the sacrifices she had made, raising the boys alone without support, and the love she had for them. I've done everything I could to give my children a happy and safe life. I may not have much, but I've always given them my all. These boys are the reason I keep going every single day. Her words brought tears to the eyes of several people in the courtroom. Even John seemed shaken. But Stella appeared restless, whispering something to John's lawyer, sensing the growing tension. The judge called for a recess. When the session resumed, Amelia requested to call a new witness. The courtroom doors opened, and in walked a figure Emily hadn't seen in years, Morgan, the former housekeeper for John's family. She walked in slowly, supported by a cane, but her eyes were filled with determination. John tensed visibly, while Stella quickly looked away. Morgan took the stand and began speaking. She recounted her 20 years of service with John's family and described what she had witnessed in the days leading up to the wedding. Her voice was calm, but her words carried great weight. John's mother manipulated the entire situation, Morgan said. She convinced him that Emily wasn't good enough for their family. She used his fears against him, saying the marriage would ruin his career and that Emily didn't have the social standing they expected. The room stirred at her words. Emily felt her heart tighten. She had always suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed hurt more than she expected. Morgan continued, detailing the conversations she had overheard and how John's mother controlled every part of his life. Then she paused, revealing something even more shocking. Stella was involved too, Morgan said. She was close to John's mother and supported the idea that he should stay away from Emily. She encouraged his decision. The room immediately erupted in murmurs. John turned to Stella, stunned, as if trying to process what he had just heard. That's not true, Stella exclaimed, standing abruptly. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. John turned to Stella, his eyes filled with doubt. You knew about all this? He asked, his voice low but heavy with disbelief. Stella tried to deny it, but her nervous expression betrayed her. After a moment, the witness was dismissed, but the impact of Morgan's testimony lingered in the air. The session was adjourned so the judge could review the new information. Emily left the courtroom with Morgan by her side, trying to process everything that had happened. The weight of years of pain seemed to be finally acknowledged, but Emily knew the fight wasn't over yet. Across the hall, John stood frozen, looking lost as if the ground had crumbled beneath him. Stella tried to pull John away, but he brushed her off, clearly shaken. As Emily walked away, she could hear Stella arguing with him. The words were muffled, but it was clear that things were falling apart between them. Despite the relief of seeing the truth finally come to light, Emily knew the battle wasn't over yet. After the chaos in court, things started to shift. John seemed different, and Emily couldn't ignore it. He started showing up regularly for supervised visits, always bringing something thoughtful for the boys. It wasn't always expensive toys. Sometimes it was a book Lucas loved, a soccer ball for Liam, colored pencils for Noah, or a puzzle that fascinated Oliver. At first, the boys were cautious, but John's patience slowly started to build a genuine connection. He listened to them, joined in their games, and even sat on the floor helping them with puzzles or drawings. Emily watched from a distance, always on alert, but she couldn't deny the boys' laughter was real and unguarded. One afternoon, John brought a kite to teach the boys how to fly it. Emily watched more closely as the wind picked up and the boys ran through the park, trying to keep the kite in the air. John cheered them on, and Liam, always the most competitive, managed to keep it flying the longest. John gave him an enthusiastic hug, and for the first time, Emily saw something she never thought she'd witness. John genuinely looked happy. Over the next few weeks, John's efforts didn't fade. He took a real interest in the boys' daily lives, asking about their classes, friends, and even their small struggles. He took Noah to an art class, encouraged Oliver as he learned new words, and celebrated Lucas's progress with a math game. These moments weren't grand, but they showed John's genuine presence. Even so, Emily remained cautious. She knew that no matter how committed John seemed, there was a history of disappointments she couldn't ignore. Still, it was impossible to miss the transformation. One evening, while cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, John approached and silently helped her. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Thank you for letting me be part of their lives, Emily. I know it's more than I deserve," he said. Emily paused for a moment, holding a plate in her hand. She wanted to say something sarcastic, something to remind John that there was still a lot to make up for. But when she looked at him, she saw sincerity. He wasn't the confident, arrogant John she once knew. He was a man trying to do the right thing, even if it was too late. "They're happy. That's what matters," she replied, turning back to the sink. Deep down, though, she knew she was happy too, seeing her children smile. As time passed, John's presence became natural for the boys. Lucas was the first to call him Daddy during a game. John froze, clearly moved, but he didn't make a big deal out of it. He simply smiled and continued playing with them. Soon, the others followed Lucas's lead, and Emily realized something real was happening. Even with this growing bond, Emily didn't lose her independence. She continued to care for the boys on her own, ensuring her role as their mother was respected. To her surprise, John seemed to understand this and never crossed the boundaries she set. He helped but never interfered. One peaceful evening, John brought over a photo album. He handed it to Emily, explaining that it contained moments from his childhood he wanted to share with the boys. Emily flipped through the album while John explained each photo, and the boys listened intently. It was a simple moment, but it showed Emily that John was trying, not just with the boys, but with her too. While all this was happening, Stella refused to accept the new dynamic. After the revelations in court, she had lost much of her influence over John, and it made her furious. It wasn't just the rejection that stung, it was the public humiliation. She couldn't stand seeing John build a new relationship with Emily and the boys while she was being pushed aside. Stella began plotting her next move. For weeks, she gathered information and pulled strings behind the scenes, planning a way to shatter the fragile peace between them. In her mind, Emily was to blame for everything, and the boys were obstacles she needed to eliminate in order to win John back. As Emily and John started building something close to friendship and the boys grew used to their father's presence, Stella made her move. One day, Emily received a call from an unknown number. On the other end, a cold voice said, "You think this peace will last? Just wait and see what's coming." Emily knew exactly whose voice it was. Her heart raced, but she refused to show fear. She hung up without responding and returned to the living room, where the boys were playing with John. She knew Stella wouldn't give up easily, but this time, Emily was ready to fight. Meanwhile, Stella continued scheming, determined to disrupt the relationship between John, Emily, and the boys. To her, the court's decision was only temporary, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to tear them apart. The days of shared time between John and the boys began to shape a new routine. Emily, ever vigilant, allowed him to spend time with the children under her supervision. John never complained about the conditions she imposed. He seemed genuinely determined to prove he could be a steady presence in their lives. At first, Emily kept an emotional barrier firmly in place. She watched John interact with the boys, always on the lookout for signs that he might leave again. But over the weeks, it became increasingly clear that John was making a genuine effort to be different. He didn't just play with the boys. He paid attention to the little things. He helped Lucas build a robot for a school project, taught Liam how to kick a ball with precision, encouraged Oliver to overcome his fear of heights at the playground, and praised Noah's drawings, carefully storing them in a folder he always carried with him. One afternoon, while the children played in the backyard, John offered to help Emily with dinner. She hesitated at first but eventually gave in. He seemed clumsy, chopping vegetables, but he didn't give up. "I never pictured you in the kitchen," Emily said, not hiding her tone of irony. John laughed, continuing to chop the carrot inefficiently. "I know. Honestly, I've never had to do this before, but I think it's time I learn. Don't you?" Emily watched him for a moment before returning to stir the pot. There was something different about him, something she couldn't ignore. As much as she wanted to keep her guard up, she couldn't deny that his simple gestures and patience with the boys were starting to change her perspective. That same evening, John surprised everyone by pulling out a guitar he had brought along. He sat on the couch with the boys gathered around him and began to play. The notes were simple but precise, and he sang a children's song that made the boys laugh, especially when he messed up the lyrics halfway through. Standing in the kitchen doorway, Emily caught herself smiling despite herself. It had been a long time since she had seen her children so relaxed and happy. Over the weeks, the boys began to bond with John in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. Liam, always the most reserved, started asking when his father would return as soon as he left. Noah, the artistic one, loved showing his drawings to John, while Lucas asked him to play video games almost daily. Oliver, still shy, followed John closely, mimicking his gestures as if he wanted to be just like him. The change was undeniable, but Emily continued to wrestle with her own emotions. Part of her was happy to see the boys creating memories with their father, but another part of her still feared it could all fall apart. John seemed to have changed, but was this transformation permanent? Could she ever forgive him and let him get closer? One morning, while they were at the park, John sat beside Emily on a bench. The boys were running around, tossing a frisbee to each other. He sighed and looked at her with a serious expression. "Thank you for letting me be here, Emily. I know it wasn't easy to give me another chance." She kept her eyes on the boys but responded honestly, "It's not about trust, John. It's about them. They need stability, and I can't risk you disappearing again." John nodded, understanding. "I get it, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." As much as she wanted to doubt him, Emily realized that so far, he had kept every promise he made since returning. Maybe, just maybe, he was truly committed to being a present father. One evening, while putting the boys to bed, John sat on the floor of their room, holding an old photo album he had brought. The children were curious to learn more about their father's childhood, and he seemed eager to share. "When I was a kid, I loved building things," he began, flipping through the album. "One time, my dad gave me a toy toolbox, and I spent weeks trying to build a little house in the backyard." Emily stood in the doorway, watching as John shared those pieces of his past with the boys. She couldn't help but wonder, could this really be the beginning of something lasting? Of course, it collapsed after the first rain, but it was the most fun I'd ever had. The boys laughed, and Lucas asked, "Can you build something with us, Dad?" John smiled and said, "Of course, we can start next weekend." As he kept telling stories, one memory caught Oliver's attention. John showed a picture of himself with a building toy, and Oliver was so interested. He started asking questions about how the toy worked, and John patiently explained every detail. From the doorway, Emily watched the sparkle in Oliver's eyes and felt that something special was happening. After the boys fell asleep, Emily stepped in to turn off the lights. John was still sitting on the floor, looking at the album with a happy smile. "Thank you for this," he said without looking up. "They're giving me something I didn't know I needed." Emily didn't answer right away. She just nodded and left him there. As she walked out of the room, deep down, she knew something was changing in her too. Maybe it was time to think about forgiving him, something she never thought she could do. The next morning, John came with tools and materials to build a small wooden playhouse with the boys. The backyard was soon filled with laughter and the sound of hammering as the four of them worked together. From the porch, Emily couldn't help but smile. This was more than just a project. It was a sign that something bigger was happening. Even though things were getting better, Emily still held back. She knew Stella wasn't completely gone, and something could happen at any moment to ruin the peace they were starting to build. But for now, she decided to enjoy the moment. That night, as the boys slept, Emily thought about everything that had changed in the past few weeks. John wasn't the same man she had known years ago. He still had his mistakes, but he seemed really committed to being part of his children's lives. Maybe it was time to let her guard down a little. Meanwhile, Stella, upset about how close John and Emily were getting, kept planning her next move. To Stella, this new bond was a threat to everything she had with John. This time, she was determined not to lose him. The days went on, and things felt different at Emily's home. She and John were unexpectedly getting along better. Though some emotional walls were still there, their conversations felt more natural, and the moments they spent with the boys showed that things were changing. Unlike before, John was showing patience and trying hard to be there for the kids without pushing his way in. One afternoon, while Emily was making lunch, John walked into the kitchen holding an envelope. "Emily, can I talk to you for a moment?" John asked. She looked at him, still cautious, but nodded. He placed the envelope on the counter without speaking at first. When he finally did, his voice was softer than she expected. "I know I've refused to help before, but this time is different. I want you to accept this," he said, pushing the envelope toward her. Emily opened it and found a check inside. The amount was enough to cover months of bills and expenses for the boys. She immediately shook her head. "John, I don't need this. I've always managed to take care of them on my own, and I will keep doing so." He raised his hands in surrender but looked at her seriously. "I know you can, Emily. I know how hard you've worked to give them everything. But this isn't just about money. It's about me really being a part of their lives. I don't want this to be a burden for you." She stayed silent for a moment, thinking about what he said. The old John would have offered the money arrogantly, like it could fix everything, but now there was something different about him. It wasn't the same attitude, it was humbleness. "I'll think about it," she finally said, folding the check and putting it back in the envelope. John accepted her answer without pushing, which surprised Emily. He was really starting to respect the boundaries she had set. Over the weeks, John's efforts became more obvious. He wasn't just helping with money, he was actually involved in the boys' daily lives. He took them to school, helped with homework, and even learned from Emily how to handle everyday problems like tantrums or broken toys. For Emily, it was surprising to see someone who once seemed so distant now so involved. One evening, after a long day, John and Emily sat on the porch while the boys slept. The moon lit up the backyard, where the tools from building the playhouse were still scattered around. "You know, I never imagined I'd be here," John said, breaking the silence. Emily looked at him, curious. "What do you mean?" "Here with you For years, I was so focused on work and on what others expected of me that I didn't see what really mattered. Now that I'm trying to fix things, I keep asking myself why it took me so long." Emily crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Sometimes, we only realize what matters when we've almost lost everything." John nodded, but there was something more in his eyes. He hesitated before continuing. "Emily, I need to tell you something about what happened at the altar." Her body tensed. For years, she had carried the pain of that day. Some wounds had healed, but others still hurt. Even so, she nodded, signaling for him to continue. "My mom didn't just convince me to call off the wedding," he said, pausing and taking a deep breath. "She threatened to stop giving me money. She said if I married you, I would be on my own." Emily blinked, surprised. "So, you left me because you were scared of losing her money?" she asked. "It wasn't just the money," he replied quickly. "It was everything. She controlled every part of my life. I was too scared to face it, so I ran away. I know it doesn't make what I did okay, but you deserve the truth." Emily felt a mix of anger and understanding. It was starting to make sense, but that didn't make the memory hurt any less. "You should have told me back then," she said, her voice full of emotion. "We could have faced it together. I would have stood by you." "I know," John said, his eyes full of regret. "I was young and foolish. I made the wrong choice, and I pay for it every day." The silence between them felt heavy, but Emily felt something inside her start to change. It wasn't the kind of truth that fixed everything, but it was a start, maybe a small one. She looked at him and said, "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, John. But at least now I know what really happened." He nodded, accepting her words. "That's all I can ask for." The next morning, when the boys ran to hug John, Emily watched from a distance. For the first time in years, she felt like something was changing for the better. There was still a long way to go, but maybe this family was finally coming together. The courtroom was crowded again. Emily arrived early, holding Amelia's hand tightly. Amelia was both her attorney and her friend. Emily took deep breaths to stay calm. Since learning the truth about being left at the altar, she felt a little less lost, but she wasn't ready to fully forgive John. The tension between them had lessened, but the weight of the legal battles was still heavy on her shoulders. John arrived with his lawyer. He seemed different that day. He was more serious, more focused. He wasn't the same man Emily had known years ago. Stella, on the other hand, wasn't there. Her absence was noticeable, but no one questioned it. Emily guessed that after everything that had happened, Stella had decided to step back to avoid more embarrassment. The judge came in, and the hearing began. Both lawyers gave their closing arguments. Amelia, always sharp, talked about the strong bond Emily had with the boys and how she had always been there for them. John's lawyer, however, said that John was now ready to be a father and that his involvement was important for the children's growth. When John was called to testify, Emily watched him closely as he spoke calmly, admitting his mistakes and taking responsibility for his choices. He knew Emily had doubts but told her he was determined to earn her trust and be there for his children. "I don't expect Emily to forgive me right away," he said, "but I'm here because I want to be the father my children deserve, and I won't give up on them." His words filled the room, and Emily felt a wave of emotion, but she didn't show it. It was still hard for her to fully believe his intentions, but he seemed sincere. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stood up, adjusting her dress with shaking hands. But her voice was steady. "For 5 years, I've been everything to my children. I raised them on my own, facing challenges only a single mother can understand. They are my priority, and I will always do what's best for them. If that means letting John be part of their lives, I'm willing to consider it. But let me be clear, my trust will not be given easily." The judge listened carefully to both sides. After a few hours, he came back with his decision. Primary custody would stay with Emily, but John would get regular visits and be active in the children's lives. Both parents were expected to work together for the children's well-being. Emily felt a mix of relief and worry. It was the fairest decision, but she still wondered what it would mean in the future. John, however, seemed grateful. He looked at Emily with a small smile, which she returned with a quick nod. After the hearing, as everyone was leaving, Stella appeared out of nowhere. She stood there with a serious look, her eyes locked on John. "Do you really think you can be this perfect father now?" she asked, her voice full of sarcasm. John met her gaze calmly. "I'm going to try, and that's what matters." Stella laughed, but it was full of bitterness. "Good luck with that. You're on your own now." Then she turned and walked away, making it clear she was done with all of this. For Emily, it was a relief to see Stella leave. Without her causing problems, things could finally move forward without drama. Later that day, John went to Emily's house. John wanted to see the boys, but he also needed to talk to Emily. When he arrived, the boys ran to hug him, already used to having their dad around. Emily, however, stayed in the kitchen, watching quietly from a distance. After the kids went to their room, John approached her. He seemed a little unsure, but he was determined. "Emily, can I talk to you?" he asked. She nodded and led him to the living room. They sat on the couch and John started speaking. "I want to thank you for letting me be part of the boys' lives. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but there's something else I need to say." Emily frowned, curious but also careful. "What is it?" John took a deep breath and said, "I still love you. Always have. I know it's too late to say this, but I needed you to know." Emily was shocked. She stared at him, trying to understand what he just said. For years, she had felt hurt because he left, but she still remembered how much she once loved him. Hearing this now made her feel confused. "John, I don't know what to say," she replied honestly. "A lot has happened. This isn't something words can fix." "I know," John said with a sad smile. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. And if one day you're ready to think about something beyond what happened, I'll be here." Emily didn't say anything. John didn't push her. He stood up, said goodnight and left. As he walked away, Emily felt a mix of feelings. Part of her was relieved to finally hear the truth, but part of her knew there was still a lot to think about. She looked at the boys playing in their room and decided to focus on them for now. John was trying to make things right, and maybe in the future, she could think about what he said. But for now, her main focus was raising and protecting her children. Months went by after the hearing, and Emily and John's routine changed. He was around more, not just with the boys, but in her daily life too. At first, their relationship was only about the kids, but slowly things started to change. They had lunch together, talked late into the night, and shared moments with the boys. It became something neither of them had ever expected. One day, while they were at the park and the boys were playing on the slide, John came up to Emily. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "Emily, I've been thinking," he started slowly. "About us. About all of this." She looked at him, waiting for him to explain. "What about this?" she asked. "Maybe we should try again." "Not just for the boys, but because I want to," John said. "I want to show you that I can be the man you deserve." Emily was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the boys playing in the distance. The months they had spent together had shown her that John had truly changed. He was more humble, more patient, and despite all the pain from the past, something inside her felt it might be worth giving him a second chance. "It won't be easy, John," she finally said, her voice soft. "There's a lot we need to work through." John nodded, a small smile on his face. "I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The following months felt like a fresh start. John and Emily began rediscovering their relationship, now more mature, with the boys at the center of their lives. Small gestures became meaningful, a dinner he cooked after a long day, a message of encouragement from Emily when he faced challenges at work, and the simple moments of laughter as they watched their children play in the yard. One day, John took Emily and the boys on a picnic in a field of flowers outside the city. It was a sunny day with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze. As the boys ran through the flowers, John asked Emily to take a walk with him. He was holding something in his hands but kept it hidden. When they reached a secluded spot with a breathtaking view of the field, John stopped and looked into her eyes. "Emily, you're the person who showed me what true love really is. Not just for me, but for our children. You're the reason I want to be a better man, a better father. I want this second chance to last forever. Will you marry me?" He opened a small box, revealing a simple yet beautiful ring that seemed to reflect the sincerity in his eyes. Emily felt tears well up in her eyes. For so long, she had imagined what she would do if something like this ever happened, but now, in this moment, the answer was clear. "Yes, John, I will." The boys, watching from a distance, saw what was happening and ran toward them, shouting with joy. Lucas was the first to ask, "Mommy, are you getting married? Are we going to be a real family?" Emily laughed, kneeling down to hug them. "Yes, my love. We're going to be a family." In the months that followed, the wedding preparations were filled with laughter and amusing chaos, especially with the boys insisting on helping with everything. The big day arrived, held in a simple garden, surrounded by close friends and family. The boys played a role in every detail. Lucas carried the rings, Noah decorated with flowers, Liam gave an adorable speech, and Oliver walked Emily down the aisle. When Emily and John exchanged their vows, it felt as though the past had finally been laid to rest. They stood together, ready to face the future they had built, overcoming every challenge along the way. After the ceremony, the family celebrated with their loved ones. The children ran through the garden, their laughter filling the air, while Emily and John shared a slow dance under strings of twinkling lights. He held her close, his voice a soft whisper. "I promise you, Emily, I'll make you and the boys happy every single day of my life." She smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "We're together now, John, and that's all that matters." That night, before bed, the boys surprised their parents with a special gift, an album full of drawings depicting happy family moments. On the last page, in big, clumsy letters, they had written, "Our family is forever." Emily closed the album and held it to her chest, a warm feeling spreading through her. For the first time in years, she felt that the journey, which had started with so much pain, had led to something beautiful. The family, built on love, patience, and the willingness to start over. Do you think Emily made the right decision by forgiving John? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.